Chapter 9. The Warmth of Ghosts. The first tremor came without warning. One moment the archive was cathedral quiet, its long rows of crystal racks catching the pale ambient light that filtered through the observation panels. The next, the floor pitched sideways, and everything loose became a projectile. Elira caught a rack with both hands, her shoulder slamming into the cold metal frame. She heard something crack and wasn't sure if it was the rack or her collarbone. The pain radiating down her arm suggested the latter, but she held on, because the alternative was the floor dropping away entirely, and there was no floor after that, only 500 meters of open stratosphere and the violet dark below.
Doctor.
Myra's voice cut through the groan of stressed support beams.
Move to the center column, now.
Elira couldn't see her through the swinging rack arms and the sudden cascade of smaller crystals rattling free of their trays. They scattered across the tilted floor in rivers of cold blue and gray light, chiming against each other, some shattering on impact and releasing thin wisps of sensation. A smell of rain, a sound like distant bells, the ghostly pressure of a hand on a shoulder. Cascade recall, minor, nothing lethal yet, but the vault held thousands of them. If the structure failed and they all shattered at once, she stopped thinking about that. She pushed off the rack and ran toward the central column, the floor shuddering under her boots. The archive's levitation anchors shrieked somewhere beneath them, a mechanical sound like a bird caught in an engine. Myra was already at the column, pressed flat against it with her arms spread wide as though she could personally hold the building in place. Her cargo vest bristled with collection pouches, most of them sealed, and her eyes were tracking the ceiling with the quick, calculating calm of someone used to deciding whether things would kill her.
Gravity surge,
She said, as Elira reached her.
Selu tide. The anchors on the east face are releasing out of sequence.
How do you know which face?
Because we're tilting east.
She grabbed Elira's wrist and pulled her around the column as another rack toppled, its crystals exploding against the floor in a burst of amber light and the overpowering scent of pine resin. Someone's childhood, someone's summer, gone. Elira squeezed her eyes shut for half a second, then forced herself to open them.
The vault's failsafe is on the sublevel. If we can reach the anchor control panel and manually sync the release sequence.
Where's the sublevel access?
East stair.
Myra stared at her.
The side that's falling.
Yes.
A long crack split the ceiling above them, running from the observation panel all the way to the north wall, and through it came a hiss of stratospheric air, cold enough to hurt. The crystals closest to the breach shivered in their trays. Their colors shifted toward the blue end of the spectrum as temperature dropped, fear-toned, though they held no fear of their own. They only reflected the chemistry of the memories sealed inside them.
Fine.
Myra said.
East stair. How do we get there without dying?
Elira looked across the vault. The central aisle ran the full length of the building, 60 meters of polished floor now listing at a 5-degree angle and getting worse. Crystal racks on either side were bolted to the walls, but the wall bolts were old. She'd filed maintenance requests 3 times in the past 2 years, and the council had denied each one for budget reasons she could still recite from memory, because she'd memorized the rejection letters out of pure furious habit.
We go along the wall.
She said.
The racks are bolted at their bases. They'll hold as handholds even if they swing. Don't lean on the crystals themselves.
Obviously don't lean on the crystals.
Myra was already moving. They went along the north wall, hands gripping rack frames, feet finding the angle of the floor by feel. The tilt worsened as they moved east, each step a controlled slide that they had to correct with their upper bodies. Elira's bad shoulder burned. She kept her jaw set and breathed through her nose. A rack peeled free of the wall ahead of them with a metallic shriek. It swung out across the aisle on one remaining bolt and hung there, a pendulum of crystal-laden shelves, swaying in the tidal air. Crystals rained from its upper shelves, pale green and dusty silver, shattering on impact, releasing a confusion of sensation that washed over Elira without her permission. The taste of warm bread, a child's laughter, the particular dread of a door being opened in the dark. She gripped the rack frame beside her and waited for the wave to pass. Her hands were shaking. Myra glanced back at her, and something in her expression shifted. Not pity, more like recognition.
Keep moving.
She said, not unkindly.
You can fall apart later.
They ducked under the swinging rack, Myra going first and bracing it against further swing with her back pressed to its base while Alira scrambled under. The metal dug into Myra's shoulder blades hard enough to leave marks, and she made a sound through her teeth but held the position. Then they were past it, and the stair door was 6 meters ahead. The floor lurched. Not a tilt this time. A full drop, as if one of the anchor cables had finally snapped, the building plunging a meter in an instant before catching again with a bone-shattering jolt. Alira was thrown to her hands and knees. Crystal shards sliced her palms. She barely felt it over the sound the archive made, a deep, architectural moan that resonated in the chest, in the molars, in some place behind the sternum that the body uses to register catastrophic things. From somewhere on the sublevel, an alarm began its slow, steady pulse.
Up.
Myra said. She was already up. She grabbed Alira's forearm with both hands and hauled her to standing, and they ran the last 6 meters to the stair door at a sprint, shoulder to shoulder, the floor still shuddering beneath them. The stairwell was dark except for the emergency strips along the steps, and it listed at the same angle as everything else, which made the stairs feel like a climbing wall. They went down them sideways, hands on the wall, feet finding each step at an angle. The alarm was louder here, bouncing off the close walls. The sublevel was a low-ceilinged service corridor that smelled of ozone and cooling fluid. Conduit ran along every surface. The anchor control panel occupied the entire east wall, an array of manual levers and readout screens that no one had operated by hand in at least a decade, because the automated systems were supposed to be reliable, and here they all were. The screens were cycling through fault codes too fast to read.
I need 30 seconds.
Alira said. She went to the panel and started reading the lever assignments by their stamped labels, her fingers tracing the worn metal as the corridor tilted further. Her good hand moved across the controls with the specific surety of someone who had studied the archive's maintenance schematics not out of interest, but out of the kind of obsessive thoroughness that is indistinguishable from grief. She knew this building. She had spent 5 years in it. She had come here every day because it held other people's memories, and being near memories, even ones that weren't hers, was the closest thing to company she could stand.
East anchor sequence is releasing in reverse.
She said.
The automated system is pulling when it should push. I need to override 3 relays in sequence.
Tell me which ones.
Alira pointed to 3 levers on the far right of the panel.
Those. When I say pull them down in order, left to right, hard. Don't stop between them.
Myra positioned herself in front of the levers, planting her feet wide on the tilted floor. Above them, the archive groaned again, and a fine rain of dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere overhead, the sound of crystals shattering came in a wave, then stopped. The air tasted of stone and something sweet, amber, or honey, or a memory of either that had no name attached to it anymore. Alira worked the 2 override switches on her side of the panel. Her injured shoulder screamed as she forced the second one down. She ignored it the way she had learned to ignore things that would slow her down.
Now.
She said. Myra pulled the first lever, then the second. The third jammed.
It's stuck.
Pull harder.
I am.
Both hands. Brace your foot on the panel base.
Myra planted her boot against the lower panel housing and threw her whole body weight into it. The lever released with a crack like a gunshot, dropping all the way down, and for one terrible second the building seemed to hold its breath. Then the tilt began to ease. It was slow, barely perceptible at first, but the screaming from the anchor systems changed pitch, moving from distress to strain, the sound of something working hard rather than something tearing apart. The corridor leveled by a degree, then 2. Then the alarm's pulse slowed, 1 beat per second becoming 1 beat per 3 seconds becoming silence. Alira let go of the panel and stood back, her hands hanging at her sides. Her palms were bleeding from the crystal cuts. She watched the readout screens cycle through their codes and settle, one by one, into green. Myra was breathing hard, both hands still on the lever she'd forced open. She let go of it slowly, and her arms dropped. She turned around and leaned her back against the panel, head tipped back, eyes at the ceiling.
Right.
She said,
We're alive.
We're alive.
A long silence. Above them, the archive's structural sounds settled into something that, while not peaceful, was no longer catastrophic.
The crystals that shattered.
Elira said. Her voice came out very quiet.
I don't know how many.
Don't count them right now.
Those were people's.
I know what they were.
Myra's voice was steady, not cruel, just honest in the way people are honest when they've had to be.
And they're gone. Count them later. Right now, we're still in a building that almost fell out of the sky.
Elira nodded. She pressed her uncut fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed. Myra was right. Myra, who was 17 and climbed the underside of Sky Islands for a living, was right. They went back up the stairs slowly. The vault looked like something had decided to rearrange it without caring about the outcome. Racks were swung out of alignment. Crystals were scattered everywhere, a galaxy of broken light across the floor, some still glowing in their final emission before going dark. Elira walked through them carefully, not looking at the specific colors of the ones that had shattered, telling herself it was because she didn't want to catalog the loss before she had the composure for it. Not yet. Her boot caught on something. She looked down. A shard smaller than her thumbnail. Not broken, whole somehow, having survived the fall in some corner or wedged between rack bases that had shielded it. It lay on its side in a scatter of gray dust, and it was warm. She stopped. The warmth was immediate, even through the thin skin on the tips of her fingers when she reached down to touch it. Not the warmth of a room-temperature object, living warmth. The warmth of something that held a living moment inside it and had never grown cold. The crystal was the color of late afternoon. Amber shot through with gold, the specific shade that certain light makes when it comes through a window in the hour before dusk. She picked it up. The laugh reached her before she was ready for it. Not a cascade, the crystal was intact, its memory sealed. But she knew this resonance the way she knew her own pulse. She had mapped this frequency herself, 5 years ago, in a lab that no longer existed in a configuration she had since dismantled. She had charted its harmonic signature on a graph she had printed and folded into quarters and kept in the drawer beside her bed, not because she needed it for reference, but because it was the last technical document that contained her daughter's name in her own handwriting. Sienna, laughing. Somewhere, in a moment that had survived a gravity surge and a shattering rain of broken lives, Sienna was still laughing. Elira's hand closed around the shard. She stood very still. Myra appeared at her elbow quietly without announcement. She looked at the crystal in Elira's fist. She looked at Elira's face. She said nothing. She just stood there, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched Elira's, while the damaged vault settled around them and the amber light pulsed once, twice, steady and small and warm as a held breath. Neither of them moved for a long time. Elira didn't open her hand. She couldn't quite. The crystal sat in her palm like something she might break if she looked directly at it, a superstition she knew was irrational and couldn't shake. Her fingers stayed curved. The warmth traveled up through her knuckles and into her wrist, and she breathed very carefully, the way she had learned to breathe in the first terrible months after Sienna disappeared, when the wrong breath in the wrong moment could turn into something that wouldn't stop. Myra shifted her weight beside her. The movement was small, deliberate, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned that sudden motion unsettled grieving things.
That's her?
Myra said, not a question. Her voice was low, roughened by stratospheric dust and a hard half-hour of near-death, but gentle underneath it.
The girl from my vision, when I held that first crystal.
Elira looked at her.
You saw her.
I saw her laughing, under something bright, something blooming.
Myra glanced away, a quick flicker of discomfort, and Elira understood it was not evasion, but the particular unease of someone describing a thing they hadn't meant to admit.
I don't experience memories when I touch the crystals. I just see, like watching through a window. That's all I can explain it.
How long have you been able to do that?
Long enough to know not to tell people.
Elira looked back at the crystal in her hand. The amber light pulsed once, steady, patient, and she thought about all the ways a person could choose to respond to that kind of trust. She had spent 5 years choosing the path that required the least of her: clinical language, professional distance. The archive kept her busy enough that she could mistake busyness for living.
Her name is Sienna.
She said. Myra was quiet for a moment.
Was she happy? In the vision, I mean. She looked happy.
The question undid something small and tightly wound in Alira's chest. She pressed her lips together and waited until the sensation passed.
She was laughing at something I had said, something genuinely not funny. She was being kind.
She paused.
She was always being kind.
They walked without deciding to. The vault corridor led them toward the east observation panels, and the panels led them to a maintenance door that opened onto the balcony, and neither of them acknowledged having chosen this direction. It was simply where they ended up, stepping out into the open air of the stratosphere with the shattered crystal smell of the archive at their backs. The cold hit first. That sharp, mineral cold that lived above the cloud layer, the kind that made the inside of the nose ache and left the taste of something almost metallic on the back of the tongue. After the sealed air of the sub-level corridor, it felt like surfacing. The balcony was narrow, a maintenance ledge really wide enough for 2 people standing close. It ran along the south face of the archive building, and from it the full drop of the sky opened in every direction below the island's edge, violet dark, fading into the deep indigo of the upper atmosphere. The sun was low enough that its light came in almost horizontally, passing through layers of cloud and particulate matter that the terraforming had never fully cleared, and the result was a sky that seemed to be holding light inside itself rather than reflecting it from above. Myra leaned both forearms on the safety rail and looked out. Her profile was sharp and tired. There was a streak of dried crystal dust across her jaw, pale gray-blue.
Does it still hurt?
She asked, not looking at Alira.
After 5 years, does it still hurt the same way?
The question was direct in the way only very young people managed, without social padding, because they hadn't yet learned that directness could be read as cruelty. Alira found she didn't mind it. She leaned against the rail beside her, her bad shoulder angled away, the crystal still warm in her closed fist.
No.
She said.
It changes. At first it was acute, like touching something that was actually burning. Now it's more like
She searched for a word that wasn't clinical.
a tooth that has been damaged. You stop being aware of it except when you press on it, and then it's exactly as bad as it ever was.
Myra made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite.
My mother was like that. Not gone, just I stopped pressing on it.
Alira didn't ask what that meant. She thought she understood. Myra straightened from the rail and turned to look at the sky directly above them, and something in her expression changed. Alira looked up too. She didn't have words for it, not immediately. The blooms came every few weeks after a major gravity surge, when the particulate layers were disturbed and the bioluminescent organisms that lived in the higher cloud strata were churned up from their usual depth and distributed into the cooler air. She had read the scientific explanation. She had read it several times. None of the reading had prepared her for the actual event, which was not like reading about it at all. They came from the south, first in streaks, then in clusters. Not flowers, not literally, though that was what they were always called. They were organisms, colonial, each one the size of a hand, but they moved in schools the way deep-water things moved, so the effect was of enormous structures blooming and contracting and blooming again. They glowed crimson at their centers and faded through orange and amber at their edges, and as the schools thickened overhead, the overlapping light turned the entire sky into something that had no name in ordinary color vocabulary. Not red. Not gold, something between the two that was also underneath both. Myra made a sound that Alira had never heard from her before. A small, involuntary sound, high and wondering, the kind of sound that surprised the person making it as much as anyone nearby. Her hands were on the rail, and her face was tipped up, and her expression had lost every defensive layer she carried. She looked, for a moment, exactly 17.
I've heard of this.
She said.
I never.
Her voice trailed off. She gestured at the sky, a loose, helpless motion, as if gesturing could finish the thought more honestly than words.
The Tittermen call it the second sunset,
Elira said.
which isn't accurate scientifically, but it's a better name than the technical one.
What's the technical name?
Post-surge bioluminescent mass emergence event.
Myra laughed. A real one this time, short and bright, startled out of her.
That's terrible.
It's very bad.
Elira agreed, and she was smiling, which she noticed only because the muscles involved felt unfamiliar, like a handshake with a hand she hadn't used in a long time. The schools thickened overhead. The light deepened. The stratospheric cold was still present but seemed less insistent now, overridden by the way the crimson light moved, slow and cellular, as if the sky had a heartbeat. Individual organisms near the island's edge pulsed in and out of visibility, drawn and released by the air currents that swept around the island's underbelly. And when they passed close to the balcony, their glow touched Myra's face and turned her dark hair to something almost red. Elira watched this without meaning to. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything. The specific angle of Myra's chin, the way her shoulders had dropped from their habitual defensive set, the fact that her breathing had slowed and matched itself to the long pulse of the bloom overhead. The girl who had hauled her upright in the dark, who had braced a swinging rack with her back, who had said you can fall apart later in a voice that was not unkind. Something she had been holding at arm's length for the past week made itself known. She looked back at the sky before Myra could catch her looking.
You could have left me.
Elira said.
In the vault, when the floor dropped, you already had what you came for.
Myra's eyes stayed on the bloom.
No, I didn't.
The crystals you collected before the surge?
That's not what I came for.
Myra's voice was matter-of-fact, undefensive, the tone of someone stating a thing that seemed obvious to them and perhaps should have been obvious to everyone.
I came because you asked. Because you said Sienna's signal was here, and you needed someone who could read a resonance without getting swamped by it.
She paused.
And because Jem needs that stabilizer and you know where to get one. I know why I'm here.
That's not a reason to stay when the building falls.
Myra finally looked at her. Her eyes in the crimson light were very dark.
What kind of person leaves someone in a falling building?
A practical one?
A scared one.
Myra said, and there was no judgment in it, only the flat clarity of someone who had had a lot of experience with fear.
Scared people do practical things. They count exits. They make trades. They don't let people in because people are liabilities.
She turned back to the sky.
I've been that person. I know that person very well. She doesn't leave buildings either. She just tells herself a different story about why.
Elira's breath went out of her slowly. The bloom overhead shifted, an enormous pulse of light moving through the school from south to north, and for 3 seconds the entire sky turned the color of embers, and Elira felt it on her face like warmth from a fire that was too far away to reach but real enough to raise the temperature of the air around her. The crystal in her hand pulsed with it. One long, amber beat, synchronized to nothing, synchronized to everything. She opened her hand and looked at it.
I am scared.
She said. It was not a confession she had rehearsed. It came out with the abruptness of a thing that had been waiting, and she let it wait no longer.
I am scared of caring about someone who might disappear. I've become very good at the clinical version of caring, the version where I can document the loss and file it properly, and know exactly what I've lost because I measured it all beforehand.
She closed her hand round the crystal again.
I have a drawer full of documentation. It didn't help.
Myra said nothing for a moment. The bloom rippled overhead, slow and vast.
I almost let Jem walk into a gravity eddy last year.
Myra said.
Because I was angry at him about something stupid, and I looked away, and when I looked back he was at the edge and the air was already pulling him sideways. I grabbed his vest and the snap broke, and I got him by the arm instead, and we both went down hard on the underbelly lattice, and he cracked 2 ribs.
She said all of this in a level voice, her eyes on the middle distance of the blooming sky.
I thought about that every day for 4 months. Still think about it sometimes. If the snap had held. If my grip had been half a second slower.
She stopped. The bloom pulsed once more, crimson at the center, amber at the edges, amber at the very edge of things.
I still look away sometimes. I can't watch him every second. I'm angry at him sometimes, and I look away. That hasn't changed.
She glanced at Alira, briefly, sideways.
But I'm still there. That's different from trying not to care.
The sky began to shift. The school was moving north with the upper current, the crimson centers drawing away and the amber edges softening and thinning, and the ordinary violet of the stratosphere reasserted itself in the spaces the organisms left behind. The blooming sky was contracting. Alira watched it go. She thought about 5 years. The cold case in her lab with Sienna's crystal untouched inside it. The maintenance request she had filed in lieu of speaking to anyone. The documentation in the drawer that she had kept, because it contained her daughter's name in her own handwriting, and she had not been able to think of another way to stay close to her. She thought about Myra hauling her to her feet in a corridor full of fault alarms.
Mira,
She said,
What does Jem like? What does he actually like, not what he needs medically?
Myra blinked. The question had clearly surprised her.
Why?
because you've told me what he requires. You haven't told me anything about him.
A pause. Something in Myra's posture loosened. A tension Alira hadn't noticed was there until it began to release.
He collects things.
Myra said,
Small things. Bent pieces of wire, buttons. He found a fragment of printed textile last spring from before the terraforming pre-lumen, and he's been carrying it around since. He says it smells like a place that doesn't exist anymore.
She stopped and cleared her throat.
He's terrible at cards and cheats anyway and thinks I don't notice. He hums when he's concentrating on something. Always the same song. I don't know what it's from, neither does he.
She stopped talking. Her jaw worked slightly, like she was deciding whether to continue.
He cried last week because he couldn't remember the color of our front door in the place we lived before. When we still had a before.
Her voice had dropped, stripped of its habitual rasp, something quieter underneath it.
He cried about a door.
What color was it?
Alira asked softly. Myra looked at her.
Green. Sort of greenish-gray, like the inside of a shell.
Tell him.
I have.
Tell him again.
Myra's expression did something complicated. Her throat moved. She looked back at the sky, where the last of the bloom was thinning to nothing, scattered organisms trailing light as the current took them north, and the violet dark settled back into its place like a curtain drawn gently closed.
Okay.
She said, a single syllable, unadorned. The sky was ordinary again. The cold was just cold. Below the island's edge, the stratosphere darkened into its deeper registers, and the first of Lumen's navigation lights were beginning to come on across the other islands, small, warm punctures in the distance, each one a community of people living inside their memories or running from them or both at once. Alira opened her hand one more time and looked at the amber crystal. It had dimmed slightly, the way a lamp dims when the oil drops low, but it was still warm, still whole.
She's here.
She said.
Some of her is still here.
Myra looked at the crystal, then at Alira.
We'll find the rest.
It was said simply, without drama, the way Myra said most things. Not a promise decorated with certainty it didn't have. Just a direction of travel, offered plainly, the way you might offer a hand to someone who had been on the ground long enough that the floor had started to feel permanent. Alira closed her fingers over the shard and held it against her sternum, above the breastbone, and felt its warmth through the layers of her jacket. She didn't speak. There was nothing precise enough to say, and she had spent enough years in the company of preserved moments to know that some of them were better held than named. The navigation lights blinked on across the distant islands, one after another, small and steady. The bloom was gone from the sky. The archive behind them was damaged, its losses uncountable yet, all those scattered lives and moments and summers and gripping dread of doors opened in the dark. There would be inventory. There would be decisions about what could be recovered and what was simply gone. Not yet. Not tonight. Myra pulled her vest tighter against the stratospheric cold and angled herself toward the maintenance door, ready to move. but she stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back.
You should eat something.
She said.
You look like you're running on documentation and guilt.
The observation was so precise that Alira almost laughed. It came out mostly as breath.
Yes,
She said.
probably.
I know somewhere. The market on the Kailora underside, the tighter men set up after a surge. Hot things.
Myra's mouth curved, brief and wry.
Not the same as a real meal, but real food by Lumen standards.
All right.
Alira said. She said it the way Myra had said okay, without ornamentation. And she followed her through the door and back into the archive's damaged interior, stepping carefully over the scattered light of other people's pasts, the crystal in her hand warming her palm all the way down the east stair and out into the open dark of the sky below.